All right. So, bottle of Peat Monster Arcana that my lovely wife Jennifer got me for Christmas. We'll nip of that. All right. Happy New Year. Oh, yeah, that's good. All right. So I wanted to do a few things with this stream. So I wanted to plug a few things that are coming up. And Happy New Year. Howdy, Joe. I'll see what I can do about that, Don. Sorry for making you waiting, Tom. So Happy New Year, John. All right. So yeah, I wanted to do a few things in the stream. So one of them, first and most obviously, is I want to just plug some various things that are coming up, and which is quite a bit since we're revamping GTAA in a few ways for the new year. And a few things that came out at the end of last year that people may have missed. And then also want to just, kind of take some super chat questions from all of you, see whatever you want to talk about. Since we didn't have a real episode this week, we had the Sopranos bonus episode, which is fantastic, of course, with Nando and Waz and Mike Racine. But we... yes, may the 20s swing. I like that. But since give people a chance to talk about what they want to talk about, and then in a little while, maybe at 6, I'm not 100% sure about the time actually. Professor Marianne Cummings, who people who watch or listen to David Feldman's show will know, she's a frequent guest there, is going to be coming on to chat about force the vote, since she and I are on other opposite sides of that particular mini controversy, and I'm sure she's going to be a good faith interlocutor for that. So again, you'll have that to look forward to. But first, let's talk about what is new and what's coming up on the show. So biggest thing is that starting on Monday, episode 20, when since we're back from this very short break that we took where we didn't have a regular episode this last Monday for the week between Christmas and New Year's, that the episode 20, so the first episode of the new year, this Monday is going to be the first episode with the new live format. So rather than having the episode be what would normally happen or what would have happened in 2020, which is where it is recorded over the weekend and then it premieres at Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be the same time slot, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, but now it's going to be live. And our stalwart producer Forrest is going to have a little bit more of an on-screen producer role at the at the beginning of the episode. At the end of the episode, there'll be a segment a la Jacobin's Weekend show where he'll have been collecting super chat questions from throughout the episode, and so I can answer some of them with him at the end of the episode. And there are also in 2021, there are going to be weekly patron bonus episodes. So it's going to be the Chapo model, regular episode for everybody on Monday, patron episode on Thursday, regular episode for everybody on Monday. Expect them probably every single time. I'm going to make the lame joke about it's all right, got Richard Wolff on the main stage this week with Gene Bajalan in the Champagne Room, which is in fact, thank you so much, Colin. You are one of the best humans alive. And so we're going to, that is in fact the lineup for the first week. So the guest on Monday is Professor Richard Wolff, Marxist economist extraordinaire. And then on Thursday, the guest is going to be Gene Bajalan to talk about the history and politics of Kurdistan, sort of try to give a, beginner's guide to that liberation struggle for American leftists, who might not be familiar with a lot of that. And then the next Monday is going to be Thaddeus Russell, so that one should be a little bit more of a debate. And then the next Thursday in the Champagne Room is friend and comrade and Zero Books editor Doug Lane. So that's what's coming up the first couple weeks of all of that. And yeah, we're also going to continue and make a little bit more formal, like it's something you could expect every single week, unless something's going on, that would stop us from doing that. A couple things that we already kind of started to do, which are the movie review streams with Forrest on Wednesdays at 5 Eastern. So the last one that we did before we took the week off, between Christmas and New Year's, was on Goodfellas with me and Forrest, and then also Jacobin deputy editor Micah Utrecht, and of course friend of the show and frequent guest Daniel Bessner. I think people know him, don't need to say anything more about who he is. And that was a lot of fun. Those had been on Thursdays. Those are good, for a while, but anyway, it's going to be consistently on Wednesdays. We're going to do one next Wednesday, I think just me and Forrest, probably, on Martin Scorsese's movie Mean Streets, which I believe is his first mafia movie, which is appropriate because we've already done Goodfellas and Casino. And at some point in a couple weeks, we're going to do a Goodfellas follow-up one with, again, Micah and Bessner, to talk about Wise Guy, which is the book about Henry Hill that Goodfellas was based on. So we're all going to read that and talk about it for that. Should be fun. And then, of course, the weekly debate breakdown series on Sundays, which was already going strong. I think we did 4 of them or 5 of them already in 2020, and that's going to be happening every Sunday in 2021. So, so far we've done James Baldwin versus William F. Buckley on the civil rights movement, and the 2 Hitchens versus Hitchens one on Iraq and on God. And then we did the Chomsky-Foucault about many things, and then William F. Buckley versus DSA founder Michael Harrington on the LBJ administration's war on poverty was the last one that we did. So coming up this Sunday, I kind of like that we've been in practice sort of alternating. Oh, that's awesome, Drew. Whoever give them an argument. The book for Christmas is they're also among the best humans on earth. But no, I really appreciate that. Hope you like it. But yeah, so I kind of like that for the debate series in practice, we've been doing every other week. We watch a more directly political debate, more or less, and then other week we do one that's a little bit more philosophical. So, more directly political, Buckley Baldwin or Hitchens versus Hitchens on Iraq, a little bit more philosophical, Hitchens versus Hitchens on religion, a little bit more, I guess Chomsky-Foucault was sort of an even combination of the two. And then, your mom is great then. Then after, then we'll, so kind of continuing that, alternating, because the last one was Buckley versus Harrington on poverty. Then that means that we are going to, so the one on Sunday is going to be Sam Harris versus Ben Shapiro on free will, with philosophy professor Ryan Lake, who wrote an award-winning dissertation on free will. So that should be fun. And then the week after, I think we're going to be back to the more directly political stuff with one with Getting the Gang Back Together, Gene Bajalan and David Slavic, who are the people who I was who I did the Hitchens versus Hitchens on Iraq one with. So we're going to do the Hitchens versus George Galloway on Iraq. So that should be a lot of fun. Bhaskar Sankara, by the way, who was originally supposed to be the guest for the one with National Review founder William F. Buckley and DSA founder Michael Harrington. And he had to cancel because he was staying with family over the holidays and the internet connection was very bad. But he's going to be back for one debate to be announced on the 24th, I think, of January. So I would. Wow. So there's a question in the chat, which is who would you vote for in an election where the candidates are Tulsi Gabbard and Gerald Ford? I'd vote for Tulsi, but I wouldn't be happy about it. If you want to know why not, watch the debate that I did with Nico House about Tulsi Gabbard last year, I guess, or no, beginning of this year. Primaries were still going on, but it was it was relatively early on. So yeah, all right. So that's everything that's coming up with the channel. Marianne Cummings, who is here to discuss Force the Vote with me. I actually saw her already in the StreamYard, although it looks like she's gone again. So as soon as she's ready, I'm going to bring in Mary. Okay, outstanding. So she is ready. So I'm going to bring her in less than 5 minutes. So first, I want to just, you know what? Never mind. Let's just bring her in now. I think I was just trying to think about the schedule in my head, and I was going to do some other stuff, but I think I'm going to do that after. I want to watch with you guys at 6 a new documentary, short 10-minute kind of documentary that our producer Forrest made for the people of Jacobin with from Thomas Frank's Jacobin talk about populism. And I am, and the other stuff I was going to plug, I'll plug after that. So let's bring in Mary now. Really appreciate the super chat, Brian. Thank you, brother, for that. So let's, but yeah, no further ado. Let's bring in Marianne.
Hey, Ben.
Hey.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let me actually. So I think some people will know who you are because they will also listen to our friend David Feldman, but other people might not. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Marianne Cummings. I live in Aurora, Illinois. I was a Bernie delegate both in 16 and in 20, and after the debacle, which I thought was the convention of 2016, Bernie had us all in a big meeting a month later and told everybody to run for office. And Bernie stands out as the candidate that is always asking people to do harder and harder things. He does not make it easy for people who are serious about it, never. So he told us all to run for public office, and I did. There was an opportunity. The Park District had a board that had been appointed by the various counties, and now that because it's a taxing body, in fact, I identified on my last property tax bill 2 items from the Park District. So, no taxation with representation, and all that. They changed the law, and I ran. I was among the first people that it's a huge Park District, so there's 3 separate sub-districts, and I'm in the second one, which is the poorest one, which is Old Aurora, which has a lot of problems and the most underserved. So that's that's my kind of local introduction into politics, apart from being kind of political since I watched the adults elect Richard Nixon, which I've never recovered from.
Yeah, fair enough. So was obviously not born yet, but I will say the earliest political conversation I can remember ever having was when I would have been 4 years old, because it would have been the morning after the 1984 election. And I remember coming downstairs, my dad was reading the newspaper, and I must have understood enough as a 4-year-old about elections to know someone won and someone lost, because I said who won, and I could still remember he just had this look of anger and disgust and contempt, and he just spat out the word Reagan. But yeah, fair enough. So moving from Nixon and
to Reagan, to those debacles, to the Democrats not being up to the task then and the present.
Yeah, right. So obviously, Biden winning is hugely, Biden winning the Democratic nomination is hugely disappointing, and I think one of the things that we all feel, disappointed about, those of us who campaigned for Bernie and did all that, is that it seems like over the last 5 years, Medicare for All has felt like it's more on the agenda than it's ever been before, or certainly, certainly in a long time. And then, there was even a point in 2018 when some centrist Democrats, people like Kamala Harris, were briefly, pretending to support it.
Yes.
So it seemed like there was some momentum there. And then of course, if Bernie had been president, then he would have used the presidential bully pulpit to push it, in whatever way that he could. So I think we're all very frustrated that that's not the situation that we're in, that, that Biden is going to be president. There's probably going to be a Republican Senate, but, even if there weren't, whatever. I mean, it's not like, it's not like the Democratic leadership in the House or the Senate supports it. And Biden said as a candidate that he would veto it. And so this is how, the force to vote, controversy comes up, because I think some people see a real opening there to move the needle, forward, and others of us are more skeptical. So do you want to just kind of start out?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to comment on something you said just a couple of minutes ago. The ball on Medicare for All has not moved forward within DC circles. Okay. Right. There was a big article in The Intercept about a year ago. I can't remember. I think it was Ryan Grimm, because he usually reports on this kind of stuff, where aides to Nancy Pelosi were reassuring all the Democratic donors and the insurance companies that there was going to be no possibility of Medicare for All. So, the ball will never move forward inside of those circles through normal give and take negotiated paths. It has to be forced. And I'm looking at two things. One, I hear the comment about, well, there has to be activism. I said, I remember almost 2 decades ago being downtown Chicago, listening to, who was it, John Conyers, talking about Medicare for All, talking about single payer. That was I think he was just introducing House Resolutions 676 way back in the day. And there seemed to be a big buildup. Quentin Young, who was a very iconic doctor, political figure in the Chicago area, doctor to Martin Luther King when he was over in the Chicago area with the Poor People's March. People forget that. Martin Luther King was organizing marches of poor people where there were busloads of poor Appalachian people coming to Chicago. So he came from that perspective. So we had all of the big icons there, and there seemed to be a big move. Nurses and doctors, and that was like years and years ago. Now we are to the point. We have done the activism because 70% of the country, and depending on the polls you read, but the Fox News poll had 72% of the country for Medicare for All. Now that's only going to increase, because even if, and it's a little dicey when the herd immunity is going to kick in from vaccines, but even when that happens, we're just beginning to see the economic fallout. So more and more people are going to be, Naomi Klein, what was that? She coined the phrase evicted from the ownership class. There's going to be a lot of people evicted from the class they think they belong to now, which is the comfortable middle class. We've got health care. We've got ours. We don't want to lose it. So I think that we've done, mission accomplished. I mean, the activism has worked. And so what has frustrated me and our friend Matt Stoller, I don't know if he's your friend, somebody I know, but he has commented, like, for the last 2 years, that there doesn't seem to be any real strategizing on the part of the squad, that the people that we're calling the squad, and they definitely need to. So how I'm kind of embroiled locally in this squabble is that 2 days after 2 days after the election, I was on David Feldman's show, and I was on right next to Alan Minsky, and Alan was talking about, because he's following all these races, like, wow, Nancy Pelosi could be in real trouble here. Like, she could be within 2 seats of losing her speakership. Yeah, because there were so many races that were that close. It turns out that number seems to be 222 right now. Because that New York race ain't going to be resolved anytime soon. But then it just struck me like, holy crap, doing the math, 218. It's like, my God, that means the squad, who doubled their numbers ostensibly that night, have reached the ability that I've been arguing with my Green Party friends ever since graduate school. I said, okay, you guys have to run somebody for president. Why the hell not put a fraction of that energy and money in every off cycle to have a 10-year plan to get at least 5 to 10 seats in the House? Then you can start voting as a block. You're not going to get everything you want, but you pick out 2 or 3 really critical, like in the Green Party case, environmental issues. And then you just tell the Democrats that you don't get any of our votes unless, our demands are, and then you start negotiating.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, my God, the squad did this in 2 election cycles. There we are. So maybe they are in a position to, and it could be, to me, it was not only just Medicare for all, but all Green New Deal, a whole spectrum of things. So about 3 weeks later, I did listen to Jimmy Dore's show, and he mentioned that. Now, somebody said he'd been mentioning it before, but that was the first time I heard it from Jimmy Dore. And I said, fantastic. Why don't they do this? They have, and by the way, this is real power. Whether or not you agree with it, whenever I hear people say, well, they don't have the number, they never have the numbers. Bernie Sanders didn't have the numbers. At the beginning of December, the Democratic leadership was willing to make a deal with Republican leadership that included no direct payments. He decided to change the narrative by using the power he had, which was, individual senators can hold up the works, and he did. So, you don't go, people have this calculus, they think in terms of, we're going to do this thing, but it's not really going to change anything else. So we're going to do the calculus, like if we do this thing and nothing else changes, we won't get what I want. And I think this is beat down dog mentality that the left has had for way too long.
Okay, so let's get into some of that. I think the Bernie stimulus, survival payments analogy is a good one for thinking about this, because I think that a big part of our disagreement about this is I don't think it's true that we've done the activism thing in any sort of mission accomplished sense. I think that there's been lots of activism, but I think the mission is very, 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 very far from.
What do you want to wait for, Ben? I mean, 70% agree with us.
Yes, I understand that. I let you talk for a long time. So yeah, I think it's very far from accomplished. I think it's accomplished a lot. I think that it's gotten us for the point where, Conyers introduced that, and there were like a couple dozen co-sponsors, to a point where it's been where in the last few years it's been at the center of debates in the Democratic Party. And it has 118 co-sponsors, which is massive progress, no doubt about that. Even though, as you say, the Democratic leadership is still intransigently opposed to it, that hasn't changed, and I think isn't going to change. As long as that's the leadership. I mean, that's how they're going to feel. Totally agreed on that. So I think that a couple of differences that I see between the two situations are, one, that when Sanders insists that we need to have the $2,000 checks, I think that that's a situation where Trump has said the same things at certain points. So you could even get a bunch of Republicans to vote for that, and also we just had checks not very long ago. It's something that I think a lot of people, like I think most normal people, think that this is something that might actually happen. They take that seriously. Whereas, and this is a big part of the reason that I don't actually think the mission has been accomplished on the activism, when it comes to those 70%, in some polls, and I know that a lot changes depending on how you ask the question, but sometimes 70% of the public, says that they want Medicare for all. I think that there's a world of difference between having majority, a majority opinion, yeah, that sounds good, I would support it, and having the kind of mobilized constituency that's going to be mad if it doesn't happen and punish politicians at the polls, which seems to be a big part of the premise of Force the Vote. And I think that we're nowhere near that. I think that the way we know we're nowhere near that is because we just lived through an election that I think showed that pretty decisively. In every single one of those Super Tuesday states that Joe Biden won, majority of Democrats in exit polls said that they supported Medicare for all. But instead of, even when the race was down to two people, right? And usually when people on our side say, oh, that it was rigged, whatever, what they mean is they artificially bringing it down to two people. So the race was down to two people. One of them was practically synonymous with Medicare for all. He talked about it so much. And the other one openly said before Bernie dropped out that he would veto it if it passed both houses while he was president. And people still chose the one who said he would veto it. Now, does that mean they don't really like the idea of Medicare for all? No, it doesn't. I think what it does mean, though, is that they're not going to punish politicians for being opposed to it. He won the primary. He then went on to win the general election with far greater Democratic turnout than last time. And you mentioned the Green Party earlier, far lower Green Party votes than last time. And yeah, there are a lot of reasons for that. But the point is that at no point in any of this were most voters, or even most voters who tell pollsters that they support Medicare for all, punishing anybody for opposing it. And I think the reason is that there is a night and day difference between being in a position with regard to Medicare for all, where when a pollster calls you up on the phone and says, hey, would you support this happening? You say, oh yeah, sure, that sounds great, that sounds wonderful. Which most people are going to. Most people hate their insurance companies, contra a lot of popular mythology on that. And taking it seriously as something that you think might happen, that you think has any kind of chance at all of happening, because I think there's a lot of, among us, the sort of hardcore of the Bernie movement, there's a lot of anger about the fact that Medicare for all isn't going anywhere, which is being channeled, in my view, misdirected in a horrendously counterproductive way by Force the Vote. But there is a lot of justified anger about that. But the problem is the overwhelming majority of people who might tell a pollster, yeah, sure, I'd support that, don't feel that anger. The reason they don't feel that anger, no matter how many horror stories they have about their experience with the medical system, maybe they even lost their health insurance during the pandemic, is because they don't think that it's something that's actually going to happen. It's like, it's like the reason that we're not frustrated right now because, there's not going to be many workers control the means of production in the next 5 years, because we don't think that that's something that could happen. They don't think it's something that could happen. So I think our task, and this is where I think the activism, where the, organizing, and, Jane McAlvey's sense, there's organizing and then there's mobilizing, so, you organize, get people behind you and then you mobilize them later. That so much of the organizing is still ahead of us, as frustrated as it might be, as much as it might seem like, hey, we've been at this forever, that I think that most people, our whole task with regards to this, if we want to achieve Medicare for all, the main thing that we need to do is to get people to take it seriously enough that they'll punish politicians at the polls, that that it really would be something that, well, if somebody voted against this, then they're going to be super vulnerable to a primary challenge. Right now, most centrist Democrats are screaming from the rooftops that they're against Medicare for all. There's no equivocation about this, and so I think that the thing the thing that we need is to get people to take it more seriously. And my concern, the reason that I think that the idea, we can talk about the idea itself, take it as a kind of suggested parliamentary maneuver that the squad can do, then we could talk about what's being done to push the idea. But I think the reason the idea itself doesn't make sense to me is because the effect of this, it's not like the symbolic votes that the Tea Party forced that then, Obama vetoed or whatever, because those things all won. They won the House and generally won the Senate before they were vetoed. That's a symbolic victory. This is a symbolic defeat. This would be, there are 118 co-sponsors. Anybody who's still not a co-sponsor after these last years in which it's been pushed that much, I think we know how they feel about Medicare for all. So that would be a 3-1 defeat with no suspense whatsoever, which I think is going to, if anything, deepen the problem of most people who think it sounds like a nice idea, not taking it seriously enough to get mad that it's not happening.
Well, I think what's going to deepen our problem, and I think Nobiki Konst had a good answer for this, and also a good answer as to why Democrats lost in areas where Joe Biden won, is that the Democrats are offering people nothing but weakness. They're offering them nothing, and they look weak. And what's going to deepen our problem is if we go into the 2022 midterms, and it's going to be a crap storm around here. It is going to be so bad for regular people in a way that I suspect a lot of my comfortable tenured friends just really can't imagine at this moment, that the Democrats are going to be slaughtered in 2022 and in 2024. And the people that keep Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the rest of Dem leadership in power will be happy with this. As I said, I used to talk about, a lot of the things people are working through right now, I would have held maybe 30 years ago. Like I used to even say as a young person, competition among elites. Of course, there's much more cohesiveness among elites, I think, because of the dominance of finance, and they own our politicians. So so there is no power that the squad has inside. They just have us. They just have, their huge Twitter followers. They just have the people behind them. And if they don't make a stand, now making a stand, remember, Hillary Clinton's people were ecstatic when they found out that Bernie was running, because they thought, oh, fantastic, we're going to run against, she'll have competition, but it's going to be slaughter. And then like, what the hell? I mean, what, he's leading in Iowa, going into Iowa? It's like, they were just blindsided, because the conventional wisdom back in 2014, we like Bernie Sanders, we like this, we like that, it's not going to happen until he takes a stand, and then it starts happening. And I think that I disagree, because I think that the thing that closes down on us, if we have Republican leadership and Republican and a smart Trump in 2024, which people have been saying, Trump is kind of an aberration. Even I'm sure most of the Republican leadership is relieved to see him gone, and they're happy to let the Democrats do their dirty work for them. They just want, because they want to just, stay mute, or just mute rather, because they don't want to piss off the base that's been riled up by the Tea Party before and things like that. So I think right now, again, when I'm hearing you, I'm hearing kind of self-reinforcing, like, yeah, what's the logical thing we can expect based on what has happened before, what's going to happen with this vote? I think things will change, and I think leadership and it will among the squad, and I think Cori Bush, when you've had her experiences, you're not so impressed by the hand-wringing of a lot of people who have been in the system for a long time. I said, I can show you real problems, that kind of thing. So I think this will be, I don't believe what you say will be true. I think just having the vote And in Democratic and activist circles, it being a rallying point, you'd be surprised how people can change their minds because something is happening at all. Now, if nothing happens, then if the Democrats do incremental nonsense, which is actually backsliding, and nothing happens for most of the people, we are going to see a rout in 2022 and 2024. And then it will really be hard to climb out of that pit. Or maybe not. Maybe the Democrats will finally be defeated and the activists will take over. I could be wrong too, but
yeah. So I think it is very likely. I agree with you and disagree with your comfortable tenured friends. I don't have any of those, by the way. I've never had anything remotely close to a tenure track job, so I don't meet those people, but generally, but in any case, I think that you're right, and your tenured academic friends are wrong. That it is very likely that that there will be a rout in 2022, and quite probably 2024, certainly at least 2022. That the Democrats will continue to lose seats, because nothing's going to change, and that usually happens anyway in the first midterm, and I think there's certainly a good chance of it then. Does that make it less likely that we are that we're going to have Medicare for all? Well, I don't think so. I think that it makes it like, I think that itself is neutral, because I think replacing a Democrat who's against Medicare for all with a Republican who's against Medicare for all, is kind of a step sideways as far as the chances.
That might be. And the thing is that, and that makes my point, is that
okay. Well, let's talk about that, because if that's a step sideways as far as go for Medicare for all, right? What would a step forward be, right? And I think that what you need to do, I mean, the bottom line thing that bothers me about this, that takes it from just being like, I don't think that this particular like proposed parliamentary tactic makes sense. I think it would be counterproductive. I think it would make the underlying problem of people not taking it seriously worse, and provide more cover in the future to Democrats who are against it. Say, hey, look, sure, why are you giving me grief about this thing that only got 1 out of the 4 votes in the House? I'm talking about real things that could really happen, like whatever half-baked public option bullshit that they come up with. But I think that what actually would change it, the fundamental reason that we don't have Medicare for all certainly isn't, I mean, sure, you could say that, AOC, the squad, these people, that lots of mistakes, lots of things they're doing one way that it'd be better if they did it the other way. But fundamentally, the reason that we're not going to have Medicare for all in the next congressional session is not because of anything one way or the other that they're doing or not doing. It's because only 118 people in the House even pretend to be for Medicare for all. Everybody else is openly against it. And so if, the reason what you need to do to get Medicare for all would be to win a whole ton of primaries against centrists, and also build up enough of a grassroots movement that's powerful enough that you could actually pressure fence sitters. And I don't think that we're anywhere near close to having either of those things right now. You're talking about how in 2016, the Hillary people didn't take, Bernie Sanders, that seriously. They didn't think it was going to go anywhere. But let's also, fair enough, but let's also not talk about this as if Bernie Sanders won or anything like that. I mean, at the beginning of this year, it was the opposite problem, right? After Iowa, especially, that everybody's, centrists, everybody thought that Bernie Sanders was going to win the nomination. The big debate that was happening was if, as seemed quite likely, he was going to show up to the convention with a plurality but not a majority of delegates, then would it be okay to nominate somebody else on the second round anyway? And that didn't happen. And why didn't it happen? Well, it's not because people preferred Biden's policies to Bernie's. They didn't. The polling evidence is pretty clear there. It didn't happen because people didn't take seriously enough the idea that Bernie was going to be able to do any of that stuff for that to be a decisive thing to get them to vote for him. There were these other things that seemed like good reasons to vote for Biden, Not to me, obviously, I campaigned for Bernie, but to them, that seemed like good reasons. Well, he'd be a stronger candidate against Trump. That's the most important thing, that we get rid of him, because when you don't think that this other stuff is going to happen anyway, no matter how much you would like it to happen, if you thought it was going to happen, you're going to vote based on different things. And final point about this, before I throw back to you, that if you're going to compare, okay, Bernie ultimately lost both times, but did better than anybody expected him to do. Well, why did he do better than anybody expected him to do? Because it turned out that, that there was a lot more support out in the general public, for what he was talking about than anybody thought that he would. But when it comes to force the vote, then it seems like, okay, well, the one thing I think we could probably agree that we do know is that centrist Democrats are not going to have road to Damascus moments on this. They are going to continue to serve the corporate interests that they've always served. So we know in advance, in this case, that it's not like, oh, maybe there's this big reservoir of support in Congress. There's not. That means that we're talking about a 3-1 defeat with no suspense to make it seem more distant than ever. And so I'm all for being confrontational. If you want to say, AOC and the rest, are too conciliatory towards Pelosi, they shouldn't be. I agree with that. I have no problem with political theater. But this particular bit of theater seems really poorly thought out to me, and seems really counterproductive, because the message that it sends is the opposite of the one that we wanted to send. The message it sends is, hey, this thing that the left is talking about is never going to happen. And so because it seems really poorly thought out to me, it seems like a particularly bad thing to do this, pressure campaign that's all about, getting people mad at, delegitimizing, calling a sellout every day, right? Which the main initiator of this does, so people won't support them in the future. The people who we want a whole ton more of in Congress, because the only way we're ever going to get Medicare for all is if we elect a whole lot more of them.
Well, okay, I should have been writing a lot of stuff down, but I'm going to take a point by point. First of all, you're right. We have to primary a lot of people. What better way to launch the 2022 campaigns? And I can tell you right now, the local one is already being launched.
Good.
And I'm going to talk more about that on Feldman, but what better way than to use a very public forum? Okay, what you've been talking about are kerfluffles on the Twitters and the Facebook, and the vast majority of people don't give a rat's ass about that. I'm seeing a very public, I'm seeing the debate and the vote on Medicare for all, because it's critical that we also have the debate, that Nancy Pelosi doesn't do these like stupid rules that just have a vote and absolutely no floor time. It's the floor time. And who do you think are going to be the most compelling speakers when it comes to Medicare for all vote? Who are going to be the most compelling speakers on the House floor? That's going to be the people who are for Medicare for all and passionately for Medicare for all. And if you get Rashida Tlaib and now Cori Bush and Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar is now totally behind, force the vote. You're going to see, and that's going to be broadcast to millions of people because they have millions of followers. And you're going to see, like, you'll have faces and you'll have arguments and you'll see the debate and you'll see how lame the people are who are against Medicare for all. Believe Nancy Pelosi does not want this debate, does not want this vote. Now, if she thought that this was going to end the Medicare for all debate and end this, any threat that it might actually be forced to be pushed forward, she'd be welcoming it. I think she's afraid that in this particular cycle where people are calling and screaming at their legislatures to frickin' do something at all for us, she's afraid that this might pass. And she might be afraid that it might pass for nefarious reasons if Republicans try to F with this, but it might blow up in their faces too, like trick cigars. Oh, I thought you were for this. I don't see, I think the arguments I think there's a lot of personal animosity to the person who is like starting this kerfuffle on the Twitters and the Facebook, but I don't think most people give a rat's ass about that. I think that the fundamental problem here is that people still do extrapolations and calculations as if politics are static. If anything at all, I think part of the reason why Bernie Sanders became so popular is that people couldn't even believe that a major candidate for office is on a debate stage saying the stuff he's saying. They go, did he just say that? Is that okay to say? Because oftentimes people need permissions. I mean, when you run campaigns, signs are important. People think, well, signs don't vote, people do. I said, yeah, but people see enough signs for somebody they thought was a long shot, and it just works like, oh, it's like giving them permission to even think about it. So I think that whether or not it gets shot down, that is a perfect launch pad. The Medicare for All debate, more importantly than the vote, although the vote is important, because then we find out if the Democrats get those 2 seats in the Senate, in Georgia, then we're going to find out who the enemy is. And he is us, because there won't be Mitch McConnell to blame anything on. We peel back a layer. So one way or the other, and of course, if Mitch McConnell prevails, then he's the enemy, and then you can use this debate, which, as I said, I think, and I may be wrong too, but I think that the debates and the arguments, not just on the floor of the House, but people being surrogates and leaders of nurses' unions and doctors and activists, this will be the trigger point. And yeah, this will be a several election year. This might be several election cycles, which is the other thing that I have an issue with the left about, is that everybody's thinking about the next election, which is always the most important one of our lifetimes. So we have to put our emotions aside. The right didn't do that. After it looked like the right culturally was soundly defeated. I'm older than you, so I remember waking up to a universe where Ronald Reagan was the president. And as devastated as everybody felt, when old Trumpy managed to squeak through, I said, I was a young person traumatized thinking this planet had 2 years left before thermonuclear warfare, and that's it. Or any number of dystopic science fiction novel storylines take place. I mean, I was physically sick, I was mentally depressed, and that never left. But life goes on, but the Republicans never accepted defeat. They did not see one election cycle as the end-all and be-all. They had, at least their leaders had a trajectory. And, hey, persistence matters. So again, if I would just reiterate, it's like, this is not the end. The vote on Medicare for All isn't the end of it. It is the beginning of the fight. And it's the only... And this is the one time we have leverage within the Democratic Party. If this opportunity closes, then we go back, then we watch the Democrats just, lose, and we will be told, and everybody will be just beat down and terrified once again that we can't ask for anything at all because the Republicans, and they'll lose anyway. My little snapshot of the situation.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, could you turn your volume down a little bit?
Volume?
Yeah.
Okay. I can barely hear you now, but.
Okay. Sorry about that. Here, I'll try to be loud and see if that works. So maybe you can turn it up a little. I don't know. We weren't getting it earlier. We were just getting it for a second. I don't know what happened there. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah, look, I think that this idea that Nancy Pelosi, that sure, if she thought that this was going to be bad for her, and I don't think we should be too dramatic. I don't think it's going to kill anything. I think honestly, I think it's very low stakes either way. But I think that but that if she thought that it was going to be bad, for the movement for Medicare for All, that that she'd do it, and she isn't doing it. She doesn't want to do it, and so. Actually, if you want to, that's a good point somebody made in the chat. If you want to turn the volume up so you can hear me better, if you just mute yourself until you're ready to talk again, that should solve the problem.
Okay.
But in any case, this idea that Nancy Pelosi, if it was going to be, bad for Medicare for all, she would allow it. She isn't allowing it, so she must know that it would actually be good for Medicare for all if it happened. I think that this is an assumption that we make on the left all the time that doesn't really make sense to me. That our political enemies, must all be, tactical or strategic geniuses. So, whatever they're doing to counter us must be the most there thing that they could do to counter us. And if doing the opposite would actually be more effective, they would be doing that. And I don't think any of that's true. I think that they are just they're just blundering around, reacting to things the way that everybody else is. I think sometimes, hey, this is something that the left wants. Well, hell, I'll deny it to them. This cute cat. This idea that I think some people have that, they're winning, they're defeating us, so they must be really good at this, whatever they're doing must make sense. I think really, and this goes back to whether mission is accomplished on the activism or not, I think really underestimates how weak we are and how easy it is to defeat us. That right now, the left is extremely weak. It's extremely scattered for the most part. What we're talking about is what could be the beginning of something, but for the most part, we're talking about media. We're talking about some activist organizations, but very little that has a solid base in the working class. That the kind of thing that successful social democratic and socialist movements around the world have had. We're living in a country, and this, by the way, would be my response to what somebody in the chat said about a general strike with 6.2% private sector unionization. So the labor movement has almost ceased to exist. What little is left is in a deep defensive crouch. And so I think that under those circumstances, it's pretty easy to defeat us. I think the effect of decades of neoliberalism, where people just don't take seriously that this stuff could happen. I don't think anybody has to be Sun Tzu or Clausewitz to beat us, especially with massive institutional backing, especially with the backing of all of corporate America. So I think that assumption is just wrong as far as a floor vote goes. And debate before a floor vote. I think that if it did happen, if in the next however long we have left, 36 hours or whatever it would have to be, if AOC and enough others had a change of heart at the last minute. I hadn't heard that about Ilhan Omar. A little quick Googling, wasn't finding that either, but fair enough. So that's one. But if all of that happened, and let's say for the sake of argument that Pelosi wouldn't just do what I'm actually 100% certain she would do, which is if 10 Democrats aren't going to vote for her, she would find 10 Republicans to make some unspeakably evil deal with, because that's
I'd love to watch that.
That's the kind of thing that Pelosi would do. But if that didn't happen, right? If she said, "Okay, I am going to make this deal with you that we're going to have this floor vote," I think that there would be maybe 15 minutes of debate. I'm sure that this right now, the drama about the leadership vote, would get a fair amount of media attention. I'm pretty skeptical that the 15 minutes of floor debate leading to a 3-1 preordained defeat would be something that would have the kind of media impact that you're saying they would have. But I guess my big thing would just be this, that it's not either the end or the beginning of anything. I think it would be a little bit of a setback. You think it'd be a little bit forward, but I think that what would that the beginning has already happened. And this is the thing that frustrates me the most about this, that people talk about it as if it's a difference between doing something and doing nothing. I don't think that the Jimmy Dore issue, by the way, should be dismissed as just what's going on Facebook or Twitter's. We're talking about somebody with a massive megaphone, who, as you point out, was the main person initiating this whole idea. It is still its most visible face. And the way that he's presented that face.
I initiated that idea.
Okay, all right. Well, most people don't know that. So because we live in an unjust world, instead of thinking that it's Marianne Cummings' idea, people think that it's Jimmy Dore's. And actually, I would love to live in a world where as many people knew who you were as who knew who Jimmy Dore was. I think we'd have a much smarter, more interesting version of this discussion if that happened. But that the person who is, the credited initiator and the main public face of it is constantly talking about how these people are sellouts, that there's no reason to support them if they don't buy into this particular idea for a symbolic tactic at this particular time, which I think is a really counterproductive message, because I'm not thinking about the next election or making some dramatic claim about how the next election is the most important election ever or anything like that. I think it's a process, as you said, over a bunch of election cycles of recruiting primary challengers in cases where centrist Democrats are vulnerable to that, of building up grassroots pressure for actual fence sitters, and I think that long-term process, we're already starting from a very weak position. We've got 1 out of 4 congressmen even saying that they support this. I suspect that some of those people, if they thought there was actually a chance of it passing, I'm sure all of them would vote for it if the floor vote happened now, because they'd have nothing to lose, because they know that it had no chance of passing. But then I think that if they did think it had a chance of passing, I'm sure some of those people are very soft yes votes, wouldn't vote yes. So it's a start, it's something. But I think that sending the message that the most hardcore Medicare for All supporters in Congress don't really support it, and there's no reason for people who care about them to support them in the future because they're sellouts, because they're not going along with this symbolic stunt, I think is an incredibly counterproductive message. And I think that framing this as doing something or doing nothing, we disagree about whether it's mission accomplished, but I think really underestimates all the activism you're talking about earlier. I think that the something that's really a something, that's not a pressure campaign that's mostly screaming about sellouts on YouTube, but that's really something is like what the National Nurses United has been doing for the last several years. Not supported this, by the way, but they have in organizing, canvassing, supporting candidates, going door to door, doing all this stuff to promote Medicare for All. What DSA working groups around the country have been doing to promote Medicare for All. What Justice Democrats does when they recruit people to run in primaries against centrist Democrats who oppose Medicare for All. Those are all things that I think are, yes, long term. And and if the question is, hey, what's the alternative that's going to do something that's going to make Medicare for All more likely to happen in this congressional session, or let's be honest, the next one, the answer is nothing, because nothing would do that. But that doesn't mean giving up. That means recognizing that you're in the middle of a very hard fought, very long campaign. A hell of a lot of progress has already been made, getting to the point where there are 118 co-sponsors, where a candidate who supported it did as well as Bernie did. But I think to get the majority of the public to take it seriously enough that they would actually punish politicians who vote no against it, I think that there is a hell of a lot more to be done before we can declare mission accomplished. But if you want to respond to any of that, you want to respond to, and then you have the last word after that.
Well, again, going back to what you said, I want to go back to the whole primary process this time around. The vast majority of the country wasn't involved in those primary decisions. As you know, that primaries sadly are only a tiny fraction of the voting population. And it was massive manufacture of consent. I mean, I was in Michigan going door to door for Bernie, and people were fearful. Do you think that he could win? They think that, they were already COVID sheltering, and I was already out wearing a mask. And this was the beginning of March, when I was doing this. So, it's manufacturing consent. We're always going to be up against this. It didn't stop Bernie Sanders from pushing this. Second of all, yes, when I said mission accomplished, I said, I think we've got the majority of people on our side, but it doesn't mean that it's ending. And it doesn't mean that having a floor vote is also ending the activism work. It can be seen as promoting it. I mean, Bernie Sanders run for office, promoted a lot of activism. It started activism where it didn't even exist, because Bernie was the counterexample to all the manufactured consent people being fed for decades on our news media. It's like, he said that? He said that. Part of the reason, and I'm probably going to talk about this, and I'm having John Lash on Feldo's after hours, is that part of the reason he's running for mayor of Aurora, because, again, the COVID and the Black Lives Matter has given us an opportunity, but says, activists need something to organize around. So it's not like, we're going to be devastated if he doesn't win. I think I'd be devastated if it looked like he could win and he didn't. But, I'll probably win my race again, because I'm running again. And we've got a little slate of us local progressives running. But the point is that you don't, the politics and the real political action and the real mechanics of government and the activism should be brought, I don't think they're completely separate. I think, I know that you disagree, but I think having a floor vote and forcing this is what some people will need to see. Oh my God, they're doing it. They said they weren't going to do it. Or somebody said they were going to do it. They are doing it. I think this could be galvanizing. Again, whatever happens, it's not going to be the end of anything. It's going to be, you get people on the record with a vote. There's one thing about co-sponsoring this. So old Kamala Harris was on the stage. Bernie Sanders generously let her and Warren and anyone else share the stage with him when he announced his Medicare for all, right? And now she turned on a dime because of politics. I'm saying that, a lot of this defeatism can be self-fulfilling if we don't do anything at all. And try, maybe have a debacle, but if you don't try, if you don't take what many people would consider an outrageous stand, which outside here, and by the way, I was at the Force the Vote town hall, and I was listening to all the stories beforehand. And if you listen to those stories and you weren't outraged, and then Jimmy did tell his story with his wife. I heard it one time before, but have an experience like that. And that was before he had his HBO specials and all that. He was bankrupt because of this illness, because of medical issues. And when you listen to the whole arc of these narratives, it's like, how can you have a shred of human decency and any kind of ethic if you're not on some level feeling outraged by this situation we have now? And I think there's enough people out there feeling suddenly being thrown out of the comfortable middle class and seeing firsthand the outrage. If you're young, if you're middle class, you don't see it. You don't experience it firsthand. That's the problem with the Medicare for all, is that most people like their insurance because nobody has actually needed it. And it's when people need their insurance, it's weird. It's kind of like marriage. It's the weird contract where you don't know the terms of it until A, in marriage, you have to get out of it, or B, with insurance, you actually need it. And then you find out the horrible terms that you've signed up for. And, but I think this kind of helps. And I think any show of people having a coherent action on that stage, and that's a national stage, okay? We can't rely on media. I mean, they've shut us out. It's been manufactured consent, got Biden, this brainstem, maybe into the White House. We have to counteract that. And that certainly won't be, and that won't be the only issue. What happens if there is a modicum of success with Medicare for all? What's stopping us from doing any number of things? I think Medicare for all is easy. Most people now understand what that is, but then one of my issues are climate change. Where's that gone? I thought that was an existential issue, right? Well, things aren't existential issues if you're worried about your own income and healthcare, which the COVID fallout is going to toss many people out, many more millions out of the middle class. So that's what I say. And by the way, yes, Jimmy has many following. He's got almost 1 million subscribers on YouTube. I'm one of them, but the vast majority of us, it was kind of like Cenk Uygur when Cenk Uygur was so popular and he would have those Titanic rants, like against Michael Schur at one time. It's on about the press covering for the Bush crime family. He had this just rant with Michael Schur there, and yeah, that was kind of impolite and unfair to Mike Schur. But on the other hand, that's what made Schenck and the Young Turks so popular back in the mid 2000s. Because wow, he isn't sounding like anybody on NBC or CNN. It was that. I mean, I wouldn't say the things that Jimmy did, but I certainly get the passion. I get the outrage.
Well, 100% get the outrage. Hold on, give me a second. I'm hearing a lot of echo. So I 100% get the outrage. I share the outrage. I've been, I could share my many frustrations with the healthcare system in the last several years. I've been in I share that outrage. Unfortunately, like I said, I don't think most people do yet. Right. I certainly think we can get him eventually. But I do totally agree. I'll just end with this point of agreement. I do totally agree that the outrage is entirely justified. You might disagree about whether it's being channeled in a useful direction in this case or not. But in any case, I certainly hope that you win that race. Is there a website or something I could direct people to for that?
Yeah, it's my old website that hasn't turned over, but MarianneCummings.com / Fox Valley Park District. That's FVPD. So I'm supposed to get my new website up fairly soon. It was supposed to be up already, but
Okay, fair enough.
MarianneCummings.com, then you can navigate your way to it.
Let's just make sure I've got that here. No. Okay. Well, in any case, that's I messed that up somehow, but here's the here is the basic thing. That's share. So here we go. Fox Valley Parks Department. So please please do if there's anything you can do to support Marianne's run and anyone else around the country who supports the things that she and I do. I always want to.
And I urge people, by the way, run for local public office. You have no idea how powerful you can be. I mean, really, nobody thinks to run for park district board, a school board. If you want, if you want a little repo man kind of tension in your life, run for school board. But if the library boards, water boards, I mean, you have as much power as you want on those low level positions. So,
all right. Thanks for coming on, Marianne.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ben.
Bye. All right. So I want to do a Marianne Cummings. MarianneCummings.com, and then it's obvious where that is if you want to find that later. I want to I guess I will say before shifting the subject that if you want to get the long version of what I've been saying here, this is can look at what I wrote about it in Jacobin. The headline probably says it all. Jimmy Dore is right about the urgency of Medicare for all, but AOC isn't the problem. So you can check that out there. But meanwhile, I wanted to show you guys. It actually premiered on the Jacobin channel about 20 minutes ago, but I was having such a good discussion with Marianne, I did not want to cut it off early. There is a short documentary. It's about 11 minutes long that was produced by our producer here at GTAA, the great Forrest Miller. So I just want to watch that with you guys right now, and then I want to plug a couple of other things coming up, and then we take a few more chat questions, and then we will cut it for today. So here is that documentary.
Populism is one of the very, very small number of things that Kansas can boast about having given the world. They made it up in the year 1891. It was meant to describe supporters of a sort of radical left-wing third-party movement, a sort of coalition between farmers and workers, industrial union members, and various other reform groups of the period. It's the last great third-party movement in American history. In 1890, they came out of nowhere to sort of upset the local Republican Party. Kansas, in those days, as it is today, was a one-party Republican state. They basically took the legislature away from the Republicans. It's a complete shock and a surprise. The next year, they had to come up with a name for supporters of their group. Populist is the word they came up with, which they derived from the Latin word populus, meaning people. Farmers had been having a very difficult time all through the 1880s. Prices for farm stuff, for what they produced, kept dropping and dropping. They discovered that they were in the grip of these monopolies, railroads in particular. And then, of course, you had the problem of currency deflation. The U.S. was on the gold standard at the time, and what that meant is that the money got more and more valuable every year as the population of the country increased, the opposite of inflation. This is really bad if you are somebody who borrows money as a part of your livelihood, which farmers did, because you borrow money, you have to pay it back a couple years later, and it's worth a lot more. So these people their lives were getting worse and worse and worse all the time. This is an enormous part of the population of America. I mean, they're more than half of the population in the 1890s. They join up with a group called the Farmers Alliance, which is very similar to what today they call the Farmers Union. They start getting together, holding these meetings, trying to figure out what they can do about their situation. The Farmers Alliance publishes all of these pamphlets, all of these newspapers get started, and they decide to go into politics. And their politics are pretty radical. They're demanding currency reform. They're demanding that the government start various farm programs. They want economic policy of the United States to be made with the interests of ordinary people in mind, which is shocking at the time because economic policy of the United States is made, of course, with the interests of the very wealthy in mind. They wanted the government to nationalize railroads. They wanted to crack down on lobbying. They wanted votes for women. They wanted the secret ballot, various reforms like that. And then they wanted a whole bunch of political reforms to crack down on corruption. The 1890s, much like today, was a time of rampant political corruption, a time of towering inequality, which goes hand in hand with political corruption. The Populist Party at first looked like it was going places. In the 1890s, it was growing by leaps and bounds. The country went into a terrible depression. There were huge strikes, like the Pullman strike out of Chicago. Eugene Debs was the leader of it, who later became a populist. You had the first ever March on Washington, led by a populist from Ohio, a guy called Coxey. They called it Coxey's Army. It was a march of unemployed people on Washington, D.C. It looked like populism was the coming movement. It looked like they were very well positioned to take advantage of all of the discontent that was sort of abroad in the land. The president of the United States at the time was a Democrat. It was Grover Cleveland. At the time, the Democrats were not all that different from the Republicans. They fought about little issues here and there. The Democratic Party meets in their convention in Chicago and basically throws Cleveland overboard and then turns against the gold standard, to the shock and incredulity of the elite classes of the entire country. And then, the shock of shocks, they nominate this guy, William Jennings Bryan, 36 years old, one-term congressman from Nebraska, on the basis of a speech that he's just given denouncing the gold standard. This is the famous Cross of Gold speech.
We will answer the demand for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold.
The Populist Party then meets in their convention a few weeks later, and they say, well, a lot of them know Bryan personally because he's from Nebraska. He talks like a populist. He uses their sort of patented vocabulary. And he's with them on this one big issue of currency reform. He's denouncing the gold standard.
They tell us that the great cities are in favor of the gold standard. We reply that the great cities rest upon our broad and fertile prairies. Burn down your cities and leave our farms, and your cities will spring up again as if by magic.
And so they say, well, he's not with us on these other issues, but he is with them on this one big issue of the currency. Meeting in their convention, they decide that they're going to get on board the Bryan train, and they're going to endorse the Democratic candidate for the presidency. At first, it looks like Bryan is going to win. And he goes on the whistle stop tour. I think it's the first one ever. He's this kind of Lincoln character. He is a man of destiny. The entire upper class of America comes together in this great gathering of the tribes of the elite against Bryan. They come together against him in this unprecedented way. And when I say the elite, I mean academics, scholars, sociologists, lawyers, economists, of course, university presidents, society preachers come together with the tycoons, the millionaires, the railroad barons of the era. The newspapers have this unanimously anti-Bryan line. And then, of course, the Republican Party, which contrives to amass the greatest campaign treasury, basically of all time. If you adjust for not just for inflation, but also for as a percentage of GDP, they spend the most on a presidential campaign that has ever been spent. William McKinley is the nominee, but he's a cipher. The real power is a man called Mark Hanna, and Hanna is a proto-Karl Rove. They come together against Bryan, and they build a kind of stereotype against him to describe what is wrong with Bryan. And they say, well, Bryan is, he's mentally ill. He is anti-intellectual. He's talking about economics, and he knows nothing about economics. He has this crackpot theory. The gold standard is the pillar of the world economy. This is what holds up the whole edifice. And he's an anti-intellectual because he doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand modernization. He doesn't understand globalization. And these farmers who support him are these kind of complete rabble. These are a lower breed of humanity. These farmers out in Kansas, these farmers who are so enthusiastic about the Bryan campaign. The whole campaign becomes this effort to keep the rabble in their place. This is a campaign between orthodoxy and correctness and the ruling class of America, the rightful hierarchs, the rightful elites of America, versus demagogues and the rabble who want to try to rise above their place. They crushed him in this amazing campaign of 1896. When Bryan goes down, populism goes down with him. 1897 is over, and they basically don't exist anymore. There's basically two legacies of populism. One is all the reforms that they proposed, and these reforms eventually came to pass. We did eventually get off the gold standard. We regulated the banks. We regulated the railroads. Women got the right to vote. Right down the list. They were very successful in that regard, but they were not successful as a third party. The other one is really interesting, and that's the anti-populist tradition. In the 1930s, you see this weird recurrence of the themes from 1896. This time mobilized against Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal in 1936. The big money behind the Republican Party, in this case the DuPont family, raises and spends an enormous amount of money on something called the American Liberty League, denouncing the New Deal, denouncing Roosevelt, using a lot of the exact same attack as in 1896.
WPA. It stands for Works Progress Administration, but critics say it really means we poke along. The boondoggling, the shovel leaning, becomes the target for anti-administration wits.
This time, it utterly goes down in flames, and Roosevelt wins re-election in one of the greatest triumphs in American history. This overwhelming landslide. Anti-populism not only can be beaten, but can be beaten rather easily because it's a despicable doctrine. As liberalism and the Democratic Party in America start to identify themselves with this kind of managerial philosophy, we have the Democratic Party actually turning their backs on the labor movement. Now we've got this point where they identify openly and overtly with the white-collar class, very affluent, suburbanized. You can see the light bulb go on in the head of someone like Richard Nixon or someone like Lee Atwater or Steve Bannon, right? They can see this happening and they're like, look at what the Democrats are giving up. Let's go out there and take it. The only way you're going to defeat these guys permanently is by recapturing the populist tradition.
We are living in a world and a state of play in our governance where the party who is eager to help subsidize private jets somehow can't find the dollars and the cents to get people a $1,200 check. We are supposed to be here to work for everyday people. We are not supposed to be here to work for political donors or political favors or the powerful. We are here to serve the people who are most vulnerable all the way up to the top.
Let's try that again. That was really good. That was on the Jacobin YouTube channel. You can find a lot more stuff like that there. It was produced, as you can see in the credits there, by friend and former guest Vic Viana and our producer Forrest Miller, as well as, of course, Jacobin's Cale Brooks. Reminds me a lot. I'm not surprised that Vic was part of that. It reminds me a lot of the illicit history documentaries that he did for TMBS. Which, if you've never seen those, you should do yourself a favor and check those out. This is that's really good stuff. So just as I said before I go. For today, I want to take any remaining chat questions and also plug a few last things. As yesterday, and again, these two came out really quickly at the end of the year. So I think some people might have missed them because of that. This is deeply stupid. I'd be the first to admit that, but I was 2 away from having published 52 articles this year, which would have seemed like a landmark worth hitting. About one a week, and so I had something in Arc Digital Media that was about to come out, but then I asked the nice people at Jacobin if there was something that I could get out before the end of the year, and so did this piece for them called "Abolish Inherited Wealth." Which you can see here, and it is an argument that we should that a society that wants to be fair and democratic should not allow the snowballing of wealth from one generation to another. The existing political debate is, of course, to the extent that it's ever about this. Is about whether you can have an estate tax at all. The right wing has done a really good job of branding that as some sort of ghoulish death tax. The more accurate phrase would just be inheritance tax. But the better question is, again, why you should have wealth be inherited from one generation to another this way at all. It's one thing, of course, to borrow an example from my friend and comrade Bhaskar Sunkara to say that socialists don't want to take away private property in the sense that we want to take away your Kenny Loggins records that you've had for decades and prize. We just don't like private property and the means of production. So similarly, if your mom dies and she wants to leave you her treasured crate of old vinyl Kenny Loggins records, I think nobody would or should want to stop you from inheriting that, but you should be able to. Yes, exactly, right. Nobody wants to take your toothbrush, and I guess you could inherit a toothbrush, although that sounds unsanitary. But should you be able to inherit wealth? In other words, should you be able to inherit assets that have the kind of value that mean that you can that you could use them to have a different economic position in society that you would otherwise, as a business owner or as a landlord. The example the article starts out with is from Charles Bukowski's novel Hollywood, where he talks about, his literary stand-in Hank Chinaski talks about his father saying he was going to save up to buy a house, and then Hank should save up to buy his own house, and then there'll be two houses to passed on to the next generation, etc. And you think, okay, well, look, do we want a society where some people are tenants and some people are landlords? If not, that's a reason to worry about passing on, those kinds of petty real estate fortunes. Never mind what Jeff Bezos is going to be able to pass down to his children. And also, we have it's a good comment. We have a society right now where we all know that concentrations of wealth lead to concentrations of political power. And as Americans, we tend to think that we can solve that problem just with some amount of campaign finance reform. I think that's kind of provincial. I think if you look around the world, there are lots of countries with much stricter campaign finance laws that we have. It's not like rich people don't still set the tune that everybody has to dance with to on a fundamental level there. Capital has lots of ways of working its will in the political process besides the kind of ostentatious direct bribery that we use in this country. David Griscom just did a video about that for Jacobin, which you should check out. It's his quick take. So I think that so the question is, right, should you have should you allow the accumulation of wealth from generation to generation to generation that ends up fueling economic inequality, and I think that you should not. So what I argue in the article is that a reasonable socialist society would pick an upper limit that was high enough that you could have reasonable inheritance of personal possessions, that the Clint Eastwood's character in Gran Torino shouldn't have been legally prohibited, of course, from passing on his car to his protege at the end of the movie. The Kenny Loggins records are fine. Even a house so you could actually live in it is fine, but we should have a strict upper limit so that after that limit, the estate tax is 100%. Yeah, I reserve the right to cancel people who are being obnoxious in chat. Keep this all as a nice environment for all of you. So yeah, I think and normally, obviously, a top marginal tax rate of 100% for anything would be a bad idea, because you can have a very high tax rate and still have all the incentives, all kinds of useful incentives for people to produce wealth. If that goes up to 100, you'd have eliminated that. But the point of the estate tax of 100% past that threshold wouldn't be to generate revenue. It would be to have a society where, again, wealth is not allowed to snowball from one generation to the next in that way. Right. So that would be my case. You can read more about that in the Jacobin piece. While we are at it, the other piece that came out yesterday to get to that 52 articles mark at the last minute was this in let me just pull this up for you guys real quick. So in Arc Digital Media, there's a article called "There Will Be Time," which is a remembrance of my grad school professor, Quentin Smith, who passed away last month before last, I guess at this point. It was in November, although it only became public in December. So Quentin was philosopher of time, philosopher of religion in the philosophy department at Western Michigan University, which is where I got my master's degree. And he had, I think he was a really unique person. Obviously he was an important early mentor for me, before I went on to my PhD program, but somebody who influenced a lot of the sort of excitement that I have about certain kinds of philosophy. But he's also somebody who I think is just worth talking about because he wrote a lot of really unique and interesting things that are worth reading. And also, he was just a really unique and interesting person. In some ways, I kind of think of this as the article. Joss Whedon described his movie Cabin in the Woods as a loving hate letter, to the horror movie genre. In some ways, I kind of think of this article as my loving hate letter to academic philosophy, because I think a lot of what made Quentin so unique and interesting and valuable are all the things that made him such a poor fit with academic philosophy, and that made him have so much trouble fitting into to normal academic structures, because he wasn't really interested in, it was never really a job to him. He was never really interested in the PMC rat race, and I think. I think he's somebody who might have had trouble fitting into certain kinds of academic structures in any possible version of the university system, but particularly in the kind of neoliberal, leaner, meaner, neoliberalized universities that exist right now, where there's just a lot more pressure, with powerless adjuncts able to be hired to do most of the work, and deans always hovering around in the background, breathing heavily, and looking for budgets to cut and departments to slash. It makes a lot less sense to hire messy, brilliant, eccentric people like Quentin than it used to. So R.I.P. to Quentin and to Michael Brooks, of course, and all the other valuable people that we lost this year. But in any case, I'm probably at the end of the episode on Monday, probably going to do a slightly longer tribute to him, maybe play a clip of him. Somebody asked in the chat earlier, I think Oliver did, and wasn't a super chat, but he's a patron, so one of the best humans alive. If whether where he should start if he wanted to read some of Quentin's writings. And so I'd say the place that he should start is with a book called Time, Change, and Freedom, which I talk about extensively in this article. It's a really unique and interesting book because it is pitched at people who don't necessarily have a background in the subject, very much so. Like, the introduction is about what he means by metaphysics and that philosophical sense in this book is going to be different from all the bullshit about crystal healing and astral projection that you'd find at the metaphysics section of Barnes and Noble. But then when you actually get into the book, it's not introductory level stuff. It's very clearly explained. Some of it's complicated, but it's very clearly explained. But the subject matter of stuff is stuff that he and the other author in that book, Nathan Oaklander, were thinking about at the time. It was like cutting edge stuff that they were working on. And so I think it's I think also the introduction that Quentin wrote to that book is probably the place where he wrestles most clearly with why it is that you'd be interested in these questions in the first place, right? Why spend your life on these kind of abstract philosophical questions it's so hard to clearly and definitively answer? And that's also the question that I got into that's also the question that I got into in the article, since, of course, some people, like my comrade Nathan Robinson, he wrote a piece about this for Current Affairs a few years ago, will say, oh, it's silly to care about this kind of abstract, or, spend your time writing about this kind of abstract philosophical issues, while there is this urgent need to change the world, as the world burns, to steal a phrase from myself. So I think that, it's a pretty deep dive into what, Quentin's, philosophical contributions and what he was like, and, why I think that it's worthwhile to pursue these things and how I think that relates to a political agenda. So check out that article in Arc Digital Media if you want to read about all that, to answer Tokyo Guda's question there. In some ways, maybe, right? So the question was, is there an analogy between my relationship to Quentin Smith and Michael Brooks' relationship? to Adolf Reed. In a certain sense, there is that he was a mentor that I learned a lot from, and who influenced some of the ways that I did and thought about philosophy. Obviously, what Michael got from Adolf was a political vision that was really central to what he was doing on an ongoing basis. And of course, I'm not really spending most of my time, these days thinking about the kinds of abstract metaphysical, epistemological questions that Quentin was. But I am, but I think those questions are interesting and valuable, and to the extent that I have spent some of my time thinking about it, even if some of his specific claims, I've come to reject. I think there's definitely big influence there. I mean, of course, politically, I've learned tons from reading Adolf Reed, and I agree with Adolf Reed about just about everything. Michael Brooks, even though he was a peer and a close personal friend and somebody I'd stay with, when I was in Brooklyn, and talk to regularly and all that stuff, but he was also in a sense, a really important, somebody who really was in a sense a political mentor, somebody who really shaped my thinking about a lot of different subjects, and who I got very used to relying on his political intuition, his sense of things. So there's definitely a relationship. There's definitely a relationship like that there. So one of many, many, many reasons that loss hit so hard this year. But anyway, if you want to read about that, I did write 2 articles about Michael this year for Jacobin. One is just called What Michael Brooks Meant to Me, and the other one's called The Cosmopolitan Socialism of Michael Brooks. So you can check both of those out there. So yeah, I think there is some I think there is some real value. I think even though it's not where I've chosen to direct most of my energies now, I do think there is some real value to thinking about the kind of things that Quentin spent his life thinking about and grappling with, like to an almost absurd extent. That he did things like he took a sabbatical while he was working on his book Felt Meanings of the World, which is all about how to reconcile his kind of atheist materialist belief that basically what there is are particles of matter and energy that don't reflect the will of any sort of transcendent creator, with his intensely felt feeling that the world and the things in it matter, that they have a significance beyond that. When he was working on that book, he was taking a sabbatical, and he actually lived for months voluntarily in a hole that he dug for himself on the beach, because he wanted to just be totally free from any kind of distraction. I mean, that's the kind of level of intensity that we're talking about with Quentin Smith. It's too it's obviously more than I would ever want to do, and it's more than most people would. But I'm glad he existed, in the same way that I'm glad that like chess grandmasters who will wake up in the middle of the night, thinking about some new variation on the Sicilian defense, or concert pianists who will literally practice until their fingers bleed, exist. I think they make the world more interesting. And especially I think it was valuable that he existed in the kind of world that, the kind of academia that exists now, that's where academic philosophy has become so professionalized that even doing what I do and doing all this kind of public facing work to try to use that philosophical training in any way I can to be useful to a workers' movement in the real world is something that's really like, it's not only something that most academic philosophers wouldn't spend their time on, it's something they wouldn't understand spending their time on. And I think in a different direction, I think that Quentin, as somebody who was just fully preoccupied 24/7 with thinking about these kinds of philosophical questions, and making and refuting these kinds of metaphysical arguments, again, it's just something that doesn't exist in modern professionalized, specialized academic philosophy. I think he was more like I think he was less like a typical normal academic philosopher. And, I think this was the year that, I think I really started to dislike my own field very much because, most academic philosophers are kind of annoying, dweebs who preferred, Elizabeth Warren to Bernie Sanders, never mind a radical socialist agenda that might start with Bernie Sanders but goes beyond him. And, most of them are very concerned with these, professional managerial class kinds of preoccupations. But, Quentin was different, not different in the sort of direction that, that I'm pushing, but different in a very valuable and interesting direction that I think he was less like that kind of professional specialized academic philosopher than he was like the Dharma bums that Jack Kerouac wrote about, who just like rode around the rails, thinking about Zen, instead of getting normal jobs and starting families, or more like, Diogenes, who would do things like, just, openly, like pee in the marketplace and, just be totally indifferent to social conventions, live in a giant ceramic jar that he built for himself in the center of Athens, literally laughed in the face of Alexander the Great, because he didn't give a shit, because he just was so totally absorbed in this world of thinking about philosophy for its own sake. And, again, it's not what I'm doing with my life, but I think it's a really interesting and really valuable thing. So, Quentin Smith, it feels a little funny to say rest in peace about somebody for whom atheism was as important as it was to Quentin. But he will certainly be missed. Thank you, class time with Kenzo Shibata. Thank you for the super chat, brother. Really appreciate it. 2020. Oh yeah. There is a story about Diogenes masturbating in the market. That there are both, but in any case, I don't know what rest in peace sort of implies. Some sort of eternal rest or not. But in any case, I don't know. Maybe I'm being too literal. But yeah, I totally agree with that, by the way. JV, I think that's the subtext of a lot of the discussion, that we were having earlier. I think that it's really important to make a distinction. This would be my pitch between what we do in left media, what people like I do, on YouTube, podcasts, writing, all that stuff, and organizing. That those are both important things, but they're different things. I think that what left media can do is it can be a source of education and entertainment and inspiration and maybe even ideological and strategic clarification. But all of those things can be support mechanisms. Those things can all be support systems for a real working class movement. But there's a difference between the support system and the thing that it's a support system for. And the thing that it's a support system for, like I was saying in that discussion earlier with Marianne, I would argue that the thing that it's the support system for is something you have to use a useful phrase that my friend Amber Frost and Matt Chrisman like to use to do the real thing. You have to log the fuck off. People can sometimes meet each other online to do real political work, and again, I think stuff that happens online and left media can perform all the support functions, but the real thing is what National Nurses United organizers who live, breathe, eat, and sleep Medicare for all are doing every day. The real thing is what people in those, it's a flawed organization, but it's one that I'm a member of, what those DSA working groups are doing. The real thing is what Justice Democrats does when they recruit primary challengers to run against vulnerable centrist incumbents. The real thing is organizing unions and winning primary campaigns and doing everything else. I think that Amber's hashtag activism article is very relevant there. That's the real thing. That's the only way to win. I wouldn't quite say no shortcuts, because sometimes there are shortcuts worth trying, but I think we need to wean ourselves out of reliance on shortcuts, is the way that I put that. So anyway, final thought before I cut it for today. So 2020, I will not pretend was anything but a awful, horrible fucking year in many, many ways. That there's no doubt whatsoever about that, right? I mean, I remember that framed photograph that you can see behind me of me and Michael Brooks and our respective significant others. Was taken in Brooklyn the weekend of that last TMBS live show, which was the last time I saw him, face to face before he passed. And I think about what that was like in February when COVID had not really hit the United States yet, wasn't on any of our radars, and Bernie Sanders was winning the election. Came heartbreakingly close. And of course, Michael was still alive, and all three of those things are kind of tangled up in my head whenever I think back to that. Because in his typical cocky Michael Brooks sort of way, when my wife Jennifer, who had been staying with a friend of hers in New Jersey while I was staying with Michael in Brooklyn that weekend, at that lunch, she told him, "Hey, every time I see Ben with YouTube video open in front of him, on his laptop, he's always either watching you or Bernie Sanders." And again, Michael, in that typical Michael Brooks swagger, was like, "Yeah, that's correct. Those are the two people, that you should be watching." Michael Brooks dying, Quentin Smith dying. He's somebody who, I was close to in an earlier period of my life, but it's still depressing. Leo Panich, who was an important mentor, for a lot of friends and comrades of mine. We could obviously be here all day if we're going to start listing that off. And, several members of my family had nasty bouts of COVID. Some others, struggled with other things I'm not about to talk about on stream. And obviously all of that happened against the background of, this sort of hope for a first baby step in the direction of a better world that was represented by Bernie Sanders, the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign going up in flames, and the whole world being rocked on its axis by the COVID pandemic, which still feels more like something. David Graeber, yeah, I didn't know him, but when I've listened to interviews, etc., like the one he did on Low Society, I have a lot of respect for that guy. Seemed to be a really interested and insightful thinker from what I know about him. But COVID still seems more like something in a dystopian science fiction novel than something that would have happened in real life. So, the combination of those things and the kind of stir craziness that we all get, in whatever level of quarantine different people are able to do with their job and family situations, and all the loss, that's happened this year. This has been brutal. I mean, I've there have been a lot of good things that have happened for me personally, and with this show and channel starting and all those articles being published. But I certainly wouldn't pretend that if a genie offered me a reset, to rewind to the beginning of the year, I'd obviously take that in a heartbeat. So we keep going, and try to. Try to take, and I think this applies both to thinking about all the horrible things that happened in 2020 and the hope that we can start to, some of the big picture political ones, that we can start to turn them around in 2021. And also, I think it applies in an indirect way to the discussion that we were having earlier, about force to vote. There's this quote, a lot of people have probably, heard me read this quote before because it's very often in my mind. It's just very smart, from Adolf Reed, where he is talking. He's talking about Sergeant Pavlov and the Battle of Stalingrad, and so. Look, I wish I believed that a single floor speech during, which would be about 2 minutes during a 15-minute debate, by AOC would move the needle as far as galvanizing and mobilizing public opinion and getting people to take this seriously as something that might happen. Unfortunately, I don't think so. I think she's given those speeches before. I think she will again. But, look, if this happens, doesn't look like it will, but if this happens, I hope you guys are right. Unfortunately, yeah. Sorry, you're right. Obviously I misspoke. I meant turn the clock back to the beginning of 2020 to redo all this. But yeah, so this is the line. It was from a interview that Adolf Reed gave to Nathan Robinson in Current Affairs, although I've seen him talk about other places also. And it's worth, I think, maybe quoting this, closing out by quoting this one more time, that he says that I was joking with someone not too long ago on the Sanders campaign trail last time. It felt like a fair amount of my effort was to try to equilibrate the passions of young, exuberant Bernie-crats, the sort who go off after a day of canvassing and get a tattoo on their arm. They tended to rise and fall in every news report with what's happening in the Iowa polls, with what's happening with what Clinton said or did. And I find myself giving them the story of Sergeant Pavlov at the Battle of Stalingrad, that these 25 troops held a building for 58 days against multiple daily Nazi assaults, and they were focused on what their job was. Their job was to hold that building, and the campaign workers' job was to do whatever they had to do that day, in whatever locale they were working in, to try to broaden the base of the campaign by a handful of people. And it didn't matter what was going on in Wisconsin or what the Clintons had said. Their job was going to be the same no matter what, because the only way to build a campaign is by doing that kind of work. And I think that's right. I'm not against theater. I disagree with some of my friends and comrades, and I really do mean friends and comrades. Obviously, Katie Halper is my friend. Obviously, Cornel West is one of in a very short list of the human beings in the world that I have the most respect for, and they disagree with me about this. So I disagree with some of my friends and comrades about whether this would be useful theater, the force the vote thing, or counterproductive theater. But I'm not against theater, and I do think that everybody should be mad about this, about Medicare for all, and channel, but I do worry about people sort of going through these cycles where they burn out very quickly and they're not as good for the long haul effort, because I don't think that there is an available shortcut at this particular juncture. I think that we're in a long haul effort, right? I understand, of course, Bernie lost both times. He came closer in some ways this time, but he did lose. He did lose both times, and but I still think that kind of movement building energy that Adolf Reed is talking about is the only way that we are ever going to get Medicare for all. Never mind all the radical political reforms and more than reforms, going beyond capitalism that I want, and that I know a lot of people who watch this channel desperately want. So I think that it's good to feel that white hot rage about the American health insurance system and how badly and desperately we need Medicare for all. What a moral obscenity it is that people have lost their health insurance during a pandemic. That if you have something that might be nothing, and it might be COVID, and it might be something other than COVID, and you go to the doctor to get it checked out, if it turns out not to be COVID, but it all turns out that your life is in danger from whatever it is, you can still go bankrupt over that. That is obscene. But you should have that white hot anger about that, but you should channel it into all of that Sergeant Pavlov style effort that Adolf Reed is talking about in that quote, to do that kind of daily work of canvassing for Medicare for all, of debunking anti-Medicare for all talking points, of going door to door, of getting your union on board with a campaign for Medicare for all, with recruiting primary challengers. If in your district where you live, there is a chance that that you could effectively primary some awful centrist Democrat who is enough of a piece of shit that they're against Medicare for all. So I think, and we might disagree about force the vote, but I think what Marianne was talking about there, running for office in her own area. I think that is a perfect kind of, small thing that can be done. And that I think all of these things have the effect of building up a movement that can win enough elections, that can primary enough centrists to get us within spitting distance of actually winning a Medicare for all floor vote at some point in the future, and then a powerful enough, mobilized enough grassroots movement by people who take this seriously as something that could happen, that we could actually effectively pressure the remaining fence sitters. We're not there. We're not going to get there next month or the month after that or the month after that. We're not going to get there in this congressional session, but we are getting a hell of a lot closer with those 118 co-sponsors, with this being at the center of debate, among Democrats for the last 5 years. That could all go away, but we can build on it and we can get there. And it's something that I am very committed to doing anything that I possibly can to help make happen. And obviously, this, what I do, this media work, that this is a career for me, and there's an entertainment aspect and all that stuff is true, but I wouldn't be doing this, if I didn't want to do everything that I could possibly do to make myself useful to that movement and to amplifying it. So, I know obviously people watch this, because they like the debates and the philosophical depth and, all of that stuff, and none of that's going anywhere. But one thing that I do want to start doing, especially with more of those patron exclusive episodes down the line, is to talk to more activists and organizers, and to do what I can to signal boost some of those local efforts, as well, of course, as doing things like, talking to, Richard Wolff about, worker self-directed enterprises, and, arguing with Thaddeus Russell, and doing the later in the month, I'm going to be doing a panel on Biden and U.S. empire with Katie Halper and Daniel Bessner and Ronnie Akalik, and all of debating libertarians and all of that good stuff. But again, that distinction is crucial. That there's talking about politics, which can be useful in all sorts of ways: education, inspiration, ideological and strategic clarification, as well, of course, as entertainment, right? No point denying that. But then there is actually, doing politics. And I think the first thing is valuable, but it's valuable if it's a support system for the second thing. If it's not tearing it down, it's helping to provide it with aid and comfort. So that's the distinction that I make. That's where I plant my flag. But in any case, people who agree with, people who agree with me about that, people who disagree with me and may even think I'm full of shit about that, but still watch and listen and still take an interest in what I say about other things. I really appreciate you guys. There is, that's the most that you can ask for people who disagree with you, that they keep an open mind and keep listening and keep watching, and continue to see all of ourselves as friends and comrades in a larger struggle. So, here, let me pour just a little bit more whiskey. So, to do whatever we can possibly do to making 2021 a little bit better than 2020. I appreciate the hell out of all of you guys. Left is best.